Welcome everyone to this week's podcast. Remember that if you are listening to this live and you're a health and wellness practitioner, therapist, healer, coach, someone who works with clients, I am running a free info session this Thursday, the 14th of April at 11 a.m. New Zealand time. It's going to be all about how to learn about the mind-body connection without sacrificing years to study. Whenever people hear about the mind-body connection and emotional or trauma work, they think, right, I've got to go do a counseling degree. I have got to go off and study psychology, or maybe I've got to go do my PhD. And these are all great things, but I do meet a lot of people who have gone on to study in these fields and still feeling a little bit lost as to how to really understand people and also to move them through some pretty difficult times. So I would love if you are a health and wellness practitioner, healer, coach, or therapist, that you register and join me for that this Thursday, 14th of April at 11 a.m. New Zealand time. There is about 80 people registered so far. You will get access to a replay, but it will only be up for a few weeks and you only get it when you register. So the link is in the show notes. However, if you're listening, it is theartoflisteningtoyourbody.com/emotional-body. You should get an email straight away. Just check your spam folder. You'll get reminders as well. And you can see all of the time zone conversions if you are joining from overseas. Okay, so let's roll into this week's podcast, which is all about how it's not about the drugs or the alcohol. When I first started delving into the mind-body connection, I was all about the physical manifestations of stored emotions in our body. However, I felt very unholistic as a practitioner, just looking at the physical aspect and not considering the mental, behavioral, spiritual, and energetic imbalances that can present for people. So in other words, when someone came to me for their physical issue, but they also had anxiety or depression, or they had OCD, or maybe they were dabbling in drugs and they knew that it wasn't a very healthy habit, or they had an eating disorder, I then all of a sudden didn't really know how to bring the whole picture together. My default would be, oh, I'll help you with your pain. And for your eating issues, you should go and see a dietitian or a nutritionist. Or you've got some issues with alcohol or drugs. Let's try and find someone for you to work with. And I found it really difficult because I always wanted to refer to practitioners who I knew as a person or had heard really good feedback about, rather than just referring to a certain profession. I really believe in that practitioner and client relationship, or therapist, patient relationship, whatever you want to call it. I think that that is more important than seeing people because of their title or what they work with specifically. And when I got introduced to Eastern philosophies, which I use a variety of, the very basic concept of a variety of Eastern philosophies, it really helped me understand people on a deeper level and a much more holistic level, and not segment their problems out. And I don't know, it's just over the years, this information has really, really landed for me. And I no longer now just see people for their physical issues, and quite often can work with people with or experiencing a number of symptoms, a number of issues, but actually they are very much interrelated. And aside from that, it can be very difficult when you're seeing a number of different practitioners who might have different belief systems and mindset and approaches, and they're not necessarily all talking to one another. So I wanted to focus today on alcohol consumption and drug consumption. I think most people would say that drug consumption is not healthy, but alcohol is a little bit more socially acceptable. So I am talking about the unhealthy levels of consumption of alcohol. Now, for me, it is not about the condition, it's not about the alcohol, and it's not about the drugs. When we have emotions that we've stored in our body and we have not had the ability or the know-how to process and express these, when they get stored in the body over a period of time, they can take their toll and they will manifest in different ways. So this could be physically, with pain, injury. It could be mentally, like the anxiety and depression, fears and phobias. And then it can also be behaviorally. So it can be eating disorders, alcohol, drug addiction, OCD. So I really put alcohol and drug use into the behavioral dysfunction. So for one person, they might succumb to alcohol, another person might succumb to drugs, but for someone else, it's an eating disorder. For another person, it might be anxiety. And again, we can't just segment these out. It's sometimes that you're going to get a little bit of anxiety and depression alongside a drug habit or alcohol use. So the alcohol and the drug use is the reaction to emotions that are coming up that are uncomfortable. So when I start working with people, I don't even tell them to stop using their drugs. And this can be anything from weed to cocaine to heroin or whatever other drugs out there people may choose to use. I don't tell them to stop their usage because they've already come to me with a really full emotional cup that is inhibiting their ability to make clear decisions in life and maybe even operate day to day at a normal level. So if their emotional cup is really full and then I'm telling them to do even more stuff, the likelihood of that landing is pretty low. So what I prefer to do is let's just get into the root of the emotion. Let's help you process whatever is stored in your body and leading you to manifest this behavior, this unhealthy behavior. And naturally, what will happen is as you empty out your cup and you learn to process your emotions and some of the really uncomfortable stuff, then your desire to engage in these unhealthy activities is naturally going to drop off. So what I look for is an awareness that they have, and they might be able to communicate and discuss with me. It's like, oh, you know what? I used to drink so many beers or so many wines or shots per night, every single night. And now instead of having like 5 beers a night, I'm only having 4 or 3. And that's a huge win. And that's something to celebrate. Because sometimes when we put such a huge goal in front of ourselves, like, oh, I'm going to go from drinking 5 beers a night every single night to nothing at all, it can be too much for the nervous system to adjust to, because that's that person's security blanket and their way of controlling the discomfort that's coming up in their body. So yeah, 4 beers a night is still a lot, or whatever alcohol you might consume, but it's still better than the 5. And it's about making those incremental and small changes. Or it could be that they still drank the alcohol, but they had a different feeling about it. They had a different awareness of their thoughts that were going through their mind. So I don't ask people to go and cut this stuff out. And it's a very masculine thing to do. It's like, go do this. It's like, well, if it was that easy, they probably would have stopped on their own. So for me, it is more about emotions are stored in the body and they're coming up to the surface and it's uncomfortable because someone doesn't know how to express these emotions. They freak out, their nervous system freaks out when it comes to the surface, and then they go and suppress. So again, coming back to the examples I used before, someone else might have an eating disorder where they decide to control their food intake, or they purge, they binge and then they purge. Someone else might just go into a headspin of anxiety and just shut off from the world. And other people will get the physical aches and pains. And anyone who has got their pain, physical, mental, behavioral, spiritual, energetic, emotional, they're always going to want someone else's pain thinking that's better. But until you have it, you can't really relate to someone else's pain. So pain will manifest in very different ways for different people. And we're focusing on the alcohol and the drugs. So if you are someone who's listening to this and you recognize that perhaps you've got an unhealthy level of consumption of alcohol or drugs, and I'd have to say alcohol is pretty subjective and it depends on where you live, and the culture with alcohol is what seems normal to you can be very excessive to other people. And there are a whole lot of standards of measurements that you can use. But I think that most of you will be switched on enough to recognize when you use alcohol for the wrong reasons versus out of the pure enjoyment of it. And yeah, just be aware as well that sometimes you're not going to realize that it hasn't been great for you until you have gone and consumed a whole bunch of stuff or taken the drugs, and then you're feeling pretty rubbish the next day. So what I ask people to do is, when they have this vice, is try and create that awareness of what were the events leading up to you wanting to have a binge session or to take those drugs. Can you sit with that discomfort? And even if you do go and have the alcohol and drugs, I'm actually okay with that, as long as you're okay. I'm actually okay with that. But if you can have that awareness of why you want to succumb to that vice, then that's a start. The acknowledgement of the emotions. Because as you can imagine, alcohol and drugs really just numb things out. They depress the nervous system. They make you feel completely different. So what is it that you were feeling? What events were going on? Who were you interacting with that made you want to drink that much more, take those drugs, become blind drunk, whatever it is? And on top of that, that is when we start to do the deeper work around those triggers. So the triggers that people experience in life, and this goes for anything regardless of drug and alcohol use, is the triggers that you experience are usually stemmed from some sort of root event where you haven't been able to process those emotions. And usually you'll notice that there's a recurrent theme to you getting triggered. So it may be a certain way that someone speaks to you. It may be the words or just this person's energy or their presence. So it's very individual for people, but really tuning into, okay, what's happening just before I consume this stuff? And when you learn to process your emotions, you might have more awareness. But the word control is coming up, but I don't want to use the word control because we don't want to control our emotions. But I guess you will have a higher threshold and resilience and tolerance for how you're feeling, and not have that reactive trigger to go and drink and to numb all of these feelings. So, in summary, it's not about the alcohol and the drugs. That's just your vice. It is just the way you have learned to manage or control discomfort that arises in your body, discomfort that is related to emotions that you may not know how to express, or you have not had the time to process because something's happened in your life. And know that when you start to learn, if you are ready to learn how to process your emotions, that can be uncomfortable in itself. But when you learn to process your emotions, you will have a greater awareness around what triggers you. And also, generally, what will happen is that your desire to engage in unhealthy habits, however they might present, will start to drop off and become less frequent, less intense. You might have relapses. Don't beat yourself up about it. It's just recognizing what tipped you over the edge. What practices have you stopped that maybe were helping you get to the point that you were at? So relapses as well are, sometimes part of the journey, but hopefully your relapses will be less intense each time. And the time between relapses will be further and further apart. So I hope that helps you. I hope that helps you understand maybe someone in your life who drinks excessive amounts of alcohol or might use whatever drug of choice they choose to use. I hope that this helps you if you are someone who is getting the awareness of a habit that you're engaging in that you would desire to start to shift. For me, it's always 99.999% rooted in emotions, why we make the choices that we do. And when you are ready, you will know that you're ready. And I trust that you will find the right people to work with you. It's not about the alcohol or the drugs. Thank you for listening. A reminder again that if you are a health and wellness practitioner, healer, therapist, coach, especially if something like this has interested you and you do get people divulging some of their deepest, darkest secrets to you and their habits and their vices, and you know that other people and other conventional, even alternative therapists haven't really been able to help them, I would love you to join me this Thursday, the 14th of April at 11 a.m. New Zealand time to work out how you can learn about the mind-body connection and this deeper part of this emotional work without sacrificing years to study. You register for the link at theartoflisteningtoyourbody.com/emotional-body. You'll get an email immediately. It'll be live for up to 2 hours. And if you can't make it, you can grab the replay, but it will only be up for a few weeks. So I hope you can join me on Thursday. In the meantime, if anybody you know needs to hear this information, then please feel free to pass it on. Bye and have a great week.